Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if you are easily fooled by headlines about science? New research actually looks at how to make us smarter about what we read. Today we're diving into a study that is all about how we understand scientific news, especially when it comes to cause and effect. You read something like eating chocolate makes you smarter or too much screen time causes forgetfulness. But is it really that simple? Scientists often find connections between things, called correlations, but that doesn't always mean one thing actually causes the other. And that is where a lot of misinformation can creep in. This new research dives deep into whether a simple correction can help us sort out facts from fuzzy thinking. Think about it. We're bombarded with news articles, often written for a general audience reporting on scientific studies. Sometimes the way these studies are presented can make it seem like there is a direct cause when all scientists found was a link. For example, a study might find that people who watch a lot of television also tend to have lower cognitive function. The headline might blare television causes brain fog, but what if people who already have lower cognitive function just happen to watch more television? That is where the confusion happens. This study looks at a direct replication of a previous experiment to see if we can make people better at spotting these mistaken causal inferences. They're essentially asking if a simple warning can stop us from jumping to the wrong conclusions. So how did they test this? Imagine reading a news story, but instead of reading it all at once, you get it one sentence or short passage at a time. That is what the participants in this study did. They were shown 10 short passages that together told a story about a new study. This fictitious study suggested that spending more time watching television caused cognitive decline in older adults. Now, here is the clever part. Participants were randomly assigned to one of two groups. One group, the no correction group, read the story as is. The other group, the correction group, got a special message inserted into the story. This message was a quote from the lead scientist saying something like, "The results have been misrepresented." And television screen time has not yet been found to cause cognitive decline. We only found a correlation between the two and no causal link is stated in the study. It's like a little warning label. After reading all the passages, participants were asked what they understood about the study. They gave their answers in their own words. The researchers then carefully read through these responses and coded them to see if people were talking about a causal link, meaning one thing directly causing another, or just a correlational link, meaning two things seem to happen together. They also had some other tasks to check memory and understanding of the difference between correlation and causation. A key part of this study was to be a direct replication of an earlier one by Irving and colleagues. This means they tried to make their study as similar as possible to the original using the same methods and design. They collected data from 129 participants, a number close to the original study. They noted some small differences in the demographics of their participants compared to the original study, like being slightly younger on average and having more male participants, but overall they felt the sample was quite similar. Now, for the exciting part, the results. Did that little correction statement actually make a difference? Yes, it did, and quite significantly. Remember our first hypothesis, that people in the correction group would make fewer causal inferences. Well, the study found strong evidence for this, on average. Participants who read the debunking statement made fewer mistaken statements about television causing cognitive decline. The researchers calculated a measure called delta, which is a way to understand the size of the effect. For causal inferences, they found a delta of 0.65. This means the correction group was significantly less likely to see a cause and effect relationship where one wasn't proven. This finding was incredibly robust, meaning it is very unlikely to be a fluke. What about the second hypothesis, that the correction group would make more correlational inferences? This also bore out when people read the correction that only a correlation was found. They were more likely to report that understanding. They were picking up on the idea that television watching and cognitive decline might be linked, but not necessarily that one is directly causing the other. The delta for correlational inferences was 0.72, also indicating a strong effect. So the debunking worked for both parts of the hypothesis. People understood that a correlation was found and were less likely to invent a causal link when it wasn't explicitly proven. What is really cool is that this study was a direct replication. They wanted to see if the original findings by Irving et al. Held up, and they largely did. The effect size for causal inferences was almost identical to the original study, which is fantastic for replication. For correlational inferences, the effect size was a bit smaller than in the original, but still in the same direction and meaningful. This consistency between the two studies really boosts our confidence in the findings. They even did some exploratory analyses using different statistical methods, and the conclusions remain similar, which speaks to the robustness of the results. Because the original researchers shared their data and methods openly, this replication team could be super thorough. They looked at whether the original study's findings could be reproduced computationally, if they could replicate the findings with new data, if the results were robust to different analytical approaches, and even considered generalizability. They found that the original study's findings met all these criteria, which is a huge positive for scientific transparency. So, what does all this mean for us watching the news or scrolling through social media? This study and its successful replication strongly suggests that simple caveat statements, a direct correction saying, "This is a correlation, not causation," are effective. They can help protect us from being misled by sensationalized headlines about scientific findings. In our increasingly information-saturated world, with the rise of AI-generated content, making misinformation even easier to spread, these kinds of debunking strategies are really important. They give us a tool to be more critical consumers of scientific information. Now, no study is perfect. The researchers here point out a couple of limitations. First, in terms of who participated, the study, like the original, mostly involved people from the UK and US who were highly educated. While this is a common issue in this kind of research, it means we should be a little cautious about assuming these findings would be exactly the same for everyone, everywhere, across different cultures or educational backgrounds. Future research could definitely explore this more broadly. Another limitation is the artificial nature of the experiment. Reading short passages one by one isn't quite like how we normally consume news. People in the real world might take notes or read entire articles. Also, online data collection, while convenient, can potentially mean more distractions for participants compared to a lab setting. They suggest future studies could use more realistic scenarios, maybe with actual news articles, and even use things like eye tracking to see how people really interact with information. This would give us an even clearer picture of how these debunking techniques work in everyday life. Overall, this is a really satisfying study because it successfully replicated an important finding. It tells us that a simple, clear correction can significantly reduce our tendency to mistakenly believe a correlation is a causation. It reinforces the idea that being a critical reader, especially of science news, is super important. The open practices of the original study truly helped make this replication robust and valuable. It confirms that debunking messages are a powerful tool against misinformation. It is fascinating to see how straightforward interventions can make us better at navigating the complex world of scientific information. Imagine how much more informed public opinion and policy could be if we all became better at distinguishing correlation from causation. It makes you wonder what other simple nudges could help us all think more clearly. This research is a brilliant example of science checking itself and building confidence in its findings. It reminds us that science is a process, and replication is a vital part of that process, especially when dealing with information that can impact public understanding and even policy. So, the next time you read an article that sounds a little too good or a little too scary to be true, remember that a simple warning can make a big difference, and keep an eye out for those correlations that are presented as causes. It's these kinds of critical thinking skills that help us all become smarter consumers of information. If you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a thumbs up. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on how to combat misinformation, and be sure to subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more explorations into the amazing world of psychology. Thanks for watching.